我哋夠鐘夠。
Good morning, members. We have already formed a quorum. It is time to start the meeting, so I call the meeting to order. First of all, item 1 on the agenda. Well, in fact, we have already invited the administration to join us. Secondly, I would like to extend our welcome to you. We are most grateful because you have a very strong team. Because last time, members suggested that perhaps the customs should send somebody here. So I would like to welcome the officer from the Customs and Excise Department. At a meeting held on the 30th of June, we have said that we would like to invite deputations, individuals to make submissions to us. Earlier on our website, we have already issued a invitation notice, and we've also written to the relevant district councils, all the 18 of them. The deadline was 15th of July. So far, we've only received one submission, that is from Mr. Yang Wei-sheng, and we've already made copies of his submission to all members and the administration. As usual, he has written in to support the 3 regulations. So first of all, I'd like to give the floor to Professor Chen to walk us through the paper. Thank you. Well, last time, members asked for the respective numbers of eggs imported by land, water, and air, and we've prepared the paper for members' reference. As set out in the paper, when you look at the figures, I hope you will give consideration to the following points. First of all, currently, in relation to eggs, we haven't got a statutory import control, and therefore the CFS has adopted a risk-based approach in relation to the various hazards concerning eggs and egg products. Moreover, most restaurants, food stores, and consumers procure food at the wholesale retail levels. And then at the wholesale and retail levels, we have imports by all routes, that is land, sea, and air. Moreover, the CFS, in the light of its operational needs, has been collecting the relevant data on such a basis. We're happy to take questions from you. Thank you. Members, if you have got any questions for the matters arising from last time as well as the latest paper, please have a show of hands. Vincent, just you alone have got a question. So 4 minutes each. Mr. Chairman, at first I thought I couldn't come. But what about those who've indicated their attendance? Where are they? I can't control over the attendance of members. When there's a quorum, I will call the meeting to order. Vincent. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't attend the meeting last time, so according to Professor Chen and the reply from the CFS, it is said that all raw eggs may carry the risk of avian influenza. So the CFS is concerned and would like to push for the endorsement of the regulations. Among the 1,500 samples collected, I don't think you have discovered anything. So what about the risk of AI? Is it very low? And then the question is, for your various regulations, after you have drafted the regulations, I want to know about the eggs incubated at our farms. Is it likely that such eggs also carry the risk, and should they also be brought under the control of the regulations? One other question for you, and what about the fertilized eggs imported? I think the FCD has got a limit on the number of such eggs. So I want to know whether they will be mixed together with other eggs at the point of import. And do you have any program to investigate into such matters, and do you test them? And then for processed eggs, they are going to be brought under regulation as well, like century eggs as well as salted duck eggs. What about other developed countries? Do they have similar regulations like what we have got here? And then for the or processed eggs, it's likely that they will carry the risk of AI. And then lastly, of course, to the retail industry, our greatest worry is that if the exporters can produce a certificate, then does it mean that the government in Hong Kong doesn't have to do anything about the consignment? Is that the case? So 4 questions for you, Under Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Vincent Fang. Now for the first question, as to why we'd like to embark on such an exercise. Currently, we've already got an administrative route. However, we found that for the hazard of AI, in particular, the highly pathogenic AI, well, there have been outbreaks in Europe and other places. So what we want to do is that for the poultry eggs, I'm afraid that there is a risk. And therefore, what we are going to do is that we propose to cover 2 areas. First of all, before importation into Hong Kong, they need to get a permission in writing from the FHD. And they need to tell us about the number of eggs and also the place of origin, so that in case of the need to trace the origin, it will facilitate our work. And let me answer your 4th question as well, and that is, they need to have a health certificate at the place from the place of origin. When they have got these 2 documents, it will be fine. And after they have got the permission from the FHD, then they can have it imported into Hong Kong with a health certificate. We would like to have it brought under legislative control. The cooked eggs and also the egg products, do they also carry an AI risk? For cooked ones, well, I think the AI risk isn't high. So in fact, for the cooked eggs, they will not be covered. You've also talked about processed egg products, not fully cooked, like century eggs and also salted duck eggs. Currently, we haven't got evidence to show that in the course of processing, they are entirely in line with the need for pasteurization or disinfection against the AI risk. So initially speaking, we do intend to cover those kinds of eggs. Maybe Dr. Lee would like to supplement in relation to century eggs. But I think I've given you the main answer. If the risk is not high and still you want to have it covered, what about the rest of the world? Maybe other countries, their consumers don't eat salted duck eggs or century eggs. So does it mean that they don't have a similar control? We have only got it in Hong Kong. The risk isn't high, and yet you're still going to cover it. Would it be having a heavy claim on our resources? So would you like to have a comparison? Let me talk more about the risk. Generally speaking, for eggs, when they are cooked, the risk isn't high. But then for salted duck eggs and also century eggs, well, they have gone through a preservation process. They haven't been cooked. And therefore, since there isn't evidence to show that in the process of preservation, what has been done, and we may be worried about the lack of safeguards concerning such eggs. So it isn't true to think that they don't carry any risk. Well, I think Mr. Fang would like to know whether there are overseas controls over such eggs as well. So please give a direct answer. I want to know whether we have got similar regulations overseas. Well, as to the need for health certificates, well, we have made reference to other places like the EU, the USA, and Singapore. They all require a health certificate covering century eggs as well, and salted duck eggs. As to whether they cover salted duck eggs, well, probably in American and European countries, probably they may not have it. But then for Singapore, well, of course, we can check it for you. But then as a general approach, that is the requirement of a health certificate. This is indeed in line with the overseas practice. Second round, again 4 minutes. So for century eggs and sorted duck eggs, they are rarely consumed. I think it is the usual practice of the government to try to have a catch-all approach. Sometimes when we say that why you haven't enforced the law, then you will say that the risk isn't high and so you haven't taken too many samples. But then we all know that for century eggs and also sorted duck eggs, the risk is not high, and still you want to cover them. And yet at the time of sampling, you seldom take the samples. And the reason you give would be that the risk is low. So if the risk is low, does it mean that in fact you can have them exempted from your regulatory control? And what about those incubated? I want to know whether they have been sort of imported into Hong Kong, being disguised as other ordinary eggs, since you have got a upper limit on the number of such eggs. That is the case of fertilized eggs.
I think we're talking about two different chains here. Generally speaking, the CFS would take samples of these tests, but for the other eggs, it will be under the other department. So they will not be mixed together. But I think to answer Mr. Fong's question, I would like to provide more supplementary information. Right now, for the century eggs and the sorted duck eggs, we use an administrative measure to control them. So they need to provide an evidence, and the importers have been providing such documentation at the moment. So we are not imposing additional pressure on them. So generally, the importers are happy with the proposed amendments. So for the incubated eggs and the other eggs, I think we are talking about two different processes here. I fully understand that. I understand that for a legal importer, they will try to differentiate the two and separate them. But then I'm not sure whether there will be other importers who try to take the chance. So I'm wondering whether they would take the other route and do it mix them together instead of separating them. So I would like to know whether you would be taking sample tests, and do you have such concerns? So maybe I'll ask the CFS to take this question at the moment, whether we are aware of such situations. Dr. Lee, please. Thank you, Chairman. As the Undersecretary has said just now, we are now relying on administrative measures, and we will take a health certificate for eggs imported from China, mainland China. So with the proposed legislation, we will be able to have health certificate for all the poultry eggs imported to Hong Kong. And it will be issued by the respective authorities in these places concerned. So we have been taking sample tests, and we are not aware that incubated eggs have been mixed with the other eggs which are imported into Hong Kong. Would you like to take Mr. Fong's question? Would you like to examine the sorted eggs and the century eggs from the legislation? Well, I think we would like to stick to the proposals for the moment, because this is an existing arrangement and the importers have no problem with the proposal. As I have said just now, there is still a risk because we are not sure about the preservation process. We are not 100% sure that they are 100% safe. So, Mr. Fong, any further question? Well, Chairman, I think that for the whole legislation, I think it is not that necessary as a whole, because there is not a high risk now. And, well, every egg would, of course, have the risk of avian influenza. And you have been doing a lot of sampling tests, and you have not come across with a big problem. You seem to be legislating just for the sake of imposing a legislation. And the importers have been abiding by your rules. So why does the government want to amend the legislation? The risk is not high, and you have not detected any problem during your sampling tests, but you are still putting forward the legislation. Undersecretary? Well, thank you, Mr. Fong, for your points. As I have explained before, the proposed legislation aims at the recommendation of the OIE, and it is a measure to prevent this outbreak of AI. So the importers have been providing such documentation, the certificates from the vets and the health certificates for the moment. And we think that if we go for legislation, it will be a measure not causing any problem to the trade. Mr. Fong, I would like to ask a question myself. I think Mr. Fong has a point here. You are trying to impose a comprehensive legislation. And if you try to introduce exemptions later, then the public will say that, why are you giving exemption? So if you go for a very stringent approach, it will be difficult for you to give relaxation at a later stage. So we hope that, as Mr. Fong has suggested, you will seriously consider whether you will be exempting century eggs and the salted duck eggs from the legislation, because the risk of AI is very low for these two types of eggs. So for them, the problem is that you may be adding other chemicals to it rather than AI virus. So if you're using the prevention of AI virus as a reason, I think there is not a very strong case for including these two types of eggs. Well, maybe you are concerned about the use of Sudan red or other chemicals. I think, the public may be more receptive to it. So I hope the administration would go back and consider whether the legislation could provide some exemption for eggs with a lower risk of AI. Well, you've said that administratively it would not be causing problem for the trade because they are already providing certificates and the necessary documentation, and I have no problem with that. Well, since colleagues from the Customs and Excise are here, so I would like them to answer the questions raised by members at the last meeting. Because last time you don't have the frontline staff with us, and I would like you to explain to us what's your frontline operation. And if there are no further questions, I would like to ask members whether you would like to go into the clause-by-clause examination process. Well, thank you, Chairman. I think the Customs adopts a risk-based approach to take samples of imported goods into Hong Kong so as to prevent parallel goods from coming into Hong Kong. At present, the Customs and Excise Department works closely with CFS, and we try to assist them in the surveillance of food imported into Hong Kong. For example, for air cargo, if Customs come across any information about food being imported to Hong Kong, we would ask the party concerned to take the food to the CFS operations at the control points for customs clearance. For goods coming into Hong Kong through land and sea, if we receive information, we would also inform the CFS and provide them with the manifest data and see if it is necessary to conduct surveillance and tests. So during our normal course of operation, if we come across food which are imported into Hong Kong illegally, we would also inform the CFS immediately for them to follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. So after the enactment of the legislation, will there be any changes to your sampling or surveillance exercise? Well, we are concerned at the last meeting that when you try to test the egg samples, at the same time, the eggs may be finding their way into our market. So how are you going to prevent that? Well, we have been working very closely with the FEHD, and we work very closely at the different control points. So for fresh meat coming into Hong Kong, we would also rely on the CFS for control the control points, and we will continue to collaborate closely with them. And we believe that in future, if eggs are included into the regulation, we will also work closely with the CFS so as to hold the gate at the control points. And if there are suspected eggs imported into Hong Kong, we will follow up together with the CFS to ensure food safety. Thank you, Chairman. Undersecretary, anything to supplement? No, please. Mr. Fong, any further questions, follow-up questions? Chairman, it's not a follow-up. I noticed that it has been gazetted and the legislation has been put to the legislature, so you are really going to enact it. But I am still concerned that you are proposing the legislation just because of a recommendation from the IEO. Sorry, from the OIE. But I think that for us, imported eggs are not causing a big problem in Hong Kong. As I have just listened to what the customs colleague has said, the risk is not that high. But when you go for the legislation, after the enactment, you would not go for the risk assessment level, and people will be asking, why are you conducting so less samples? I have been with the legislature for 11 years, and every time the answer I get is that if the risk is not high, then the administration will say that they are not doing that much surveillance. But when they are going for legislation, they would not look into this area. So I realize that the legislation will be enacted and you want to implement it by the end of this year. But I think for the trade, as the Undersecretary has said, the impact is not big because it won't affect their existing operation much. I believe so too. But still, I think that there isn't much sense or meaning to enact this piece of legislation. So I would like to represent my party to say that we understand that the legislation has to be enacted, but we think that it is a meaningless piece of legislation. That's my party line. Any further questions? If not, then we will go into clause-by-clause examination. No question. Okay, clause-by-clause examination. Administration? I'll ask Mr. Chan to take us through, please. Thank you, Chairman. We would like to... Can you please speak up or turn the volume up? Yes, Chairman. We have to amend 3 pieces of legislation. So we are talking about the IEGR 2015, the IGMPL 2015, and the FBR 2015. So all 3 pieces of legislation have been gazetted. So I would like to see whether Chairman and members have any questions, and we'll be happy to take them. Any questions, members? There is no question from members, so for the administration, could you please explain to us what are the proposed amendments and the reason for such amendments so the members would be clearer about the proposals? Yes, Mr. Chairman, perhaps I will try to go through the major amendments. For the IGMPL 2015, we have introduced new definitions. This is because we have to impose control on eggs. So for the IGMPL 2015, for Clause 2, we have introduced a new definition of eggs. So we define the eggs, whether they are shelled or unshelled, whether they are cooked or not, whether they are preserved or not, or whether they are dried or chilled, or whether they contain any functional ingredients. They will be controlled. But if the eggs are fully cooked and they are part of the compounded food, they will be exempted from the control. Another major amendment is Clause 41A. We will introduce some special circumstances to control the import of eggs. For example, under the certain 4 circumstances, the eggs will not be imported into Hong Kong. First, they do not have the health certificate. They do not have the transshipment certificate. They have not been obtained the written permission from the FEHD, and they have not followed the conditions imposed by the health officer of the FEHD. So these eggs will not be allowed to be imported into Hong Kong. So this is also one of the major amendments. Also, members are concerned about the origin of the places for the import of eggs. So as we have explained before, we are requiring the importers to provide information about the eggs to be imported to us before they are imported into Hong Kong. So these are contained in clause 7242. So I'll briefly go through the information. First of all, we need to know the types of eggs, the number of eggs, when they are coming into Hong Kong, the means of transportation, whether they are to be imported from containers. If yes, we need the container number. So these are very important information because this will allow us, the colleagues of FEHD, to track the eggs as to how they are imported into Hong Kong, so that colleagues of the CFS could be able to perform better. So these are the major points that I would like to highlight. Any questions, members? If not, I would like to raise a question on page 7. Clause 21AB4. That is, if you have not comply with the conditions imposed by the health officers. What are the conditions? Could you please explain to us?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, for this one, it says that the importer, before the importation of eggs, must get a written permission from the FEHD. And FEHD may have to consider whether the eggs are fit for consumption. So maybe some examples can be cited by Dr. Lee. Yes, just now, Professor Chen has already said that under 2A, we have said that certain information should be given to us so as to allow us to trace the eggs, like the type and quantity of the eggs to be imported, the expected date of arrival of the eggs, and also the means of transport. We also have this condition, that is, when the goods arrive, the importer must report to the FEHD about the data concerning the arrival of the eggs. And then on such a basis, we'll try to see whether we would like to have a sample test. Well, the word condition, it appears that it is very vague. It seems that the government is free to impose any conditions. I want to know whether the conditions are reasonable ones. So please explain so that we can have it reduced to writing, so that we can have it put on record. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For your question, yes, I think we can have a further piece of information. Both myself and Dr. Lee have already answered this question, and you can find it in the regulation. Please turn to page 7 of the marked up copy. We are going to add a new clause 2A, and for the conditions that I have referred to, they are all clearly reflected in the wordings of 2A. Other members, any other questions? Mr. Chairman, if in relation to the imported game, meat and poultry regulations, if you don't have questions, let me go to the import and export general regulations. Yes, please. Yes, for the import and export general regulations, I would like to brief you on the proposed amendments. Well, they are mostly technical in nature. This is because we are going to cover poultry eggs as well, and therefore, for Cap 1328K, we are going to change the nomenclature so as to include an eggs in the title as well. So wherever it is being mentioned in the laws, we have to introduce a consequential amendment. And therefore, for I&E General Amendment Regulation 2015, we would like to reflect this change. That is the new title of imported game meat, poultry and eggs regulations. And then we would like to introduce the transitional arrangements when it comes into effect on the 5th of December 2015. Other members, Dr. Helena Wong. Today, we have got someone from the Customs and Excise. Well, in fact, a lot of questions were asked at our last meeting. That is, when the food items arrive, well, in fact, I understand that food can be imported by land, by sea, or by air. I want to know when the customs will know about the arrival. Do you know them when they are still offshore? And are you aware of the types of food and origins of food, like whether they are eggs and whether they come from the 5 prefectures in Japan where importation has been banned? And also, is the FHD aware of it? And what about the CFS? Or is it the case that the CFS has got its own database? Is there communication among you so that all of you will be having your attention drawn to possible irregularities? Dr. Helena Wong, which particular regulation are you on? We have already started the cross-by-cross scrutiny. Well, we had a meeting last time. We asked many questions. We proposed to get the CNE official to attend. Yes, we did put the questions to them, but you weren't here yet. I'm sorry, I was otherwise engaged. So does it mean that you don't allow me to ask questions? Just now, I put a question to you. Any questions? And then we said we would have the cross-by-cross scrutiny. Let me finish. It's not the first time that I sit on such a committee. Helena, please listen to me. You're asking questions for the first time, so I do permit it. But please understand that we are already in the process of cross-by-cross. But I do allow you to ask this question. CNE. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Wong. Just now, we have already given an answer in relation to the workflow of the CNE. Let me here answer once again the question asked by Dr. Wong. Well, for the transport by land, sea, and air, we do have arrangements to facilitate the importers to give notice in advance for the air freighters. Usually before the arrival of the aircraft, information will be given to the CNE. Upon receiving of such information, if food is involved, will issue an instruction. That is, will ask the importer to take the food to the CFS office for clearance. So all food items will be overseen by the CFS. For land transport, we have also got a system, and this is a legal requirement. All the food importers or the agents must, before the arrival of the food and at least 30 minutes in advance, input the information into the relevant system, and the CNE will get the information. Currently, we have got a cooperation mechanism with the FHD. Food-related data will be referred to the CFS for risk assessment. And then, if necessary, they can make arrangements with the importers to have a test. For transport by sea, we have got an electronic clearance system so that the shipping companies, for example, can submit the information in advance. And again, upon request by the CFS, food-related data will be referred to the CFS in advance for risk assessment and follow-up work. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, yes, since we have got sufficient time, so I can be more relaxed about the time management? Yes, I welcome the answer from the C&D, but I would like to have something in writing because the systems are rather complicated, so as to assist us to understand how we are monitoring the importation of food. For transport by sea, I want to know whether the CFS has got an office. Now, you have got one at Mankamto for vegetables, and then you have also got an office at the airport. But what about the vessels? Whether they are large or small vessels, do you know in advance whether they are carrying any food into Hong Kong? Mr. Chairman, well, we encourage the companies to try their best to submit the information in advance to us, that is the CNE, whenever we are told that food is being imported into Hong Kong, then we will alert the CFS. So the current arrangement is such that most shipping companies will accept our arrangements. So most of them, does it mean that some of them do not inform you in advance as to what's being carried on their vessels? So what is the percentage? Thank you, Dr. Wong. We believe that over 90% of the shipping companies will make use of the advanced notification system to alert the CNE. But of course, some companies, a small number of them, maybe they have operational restrictions and they're not able to notify us in advance. If necessary, we can ask the companies to provide the information to us. May I ask for the questions? Sure. But let me give him some advice. Over 90% have been notifying you in advance. Please cover other scenarios. And please give the reasons so that she doesn't have to ask supplementary questions. You can't anticipate my supplementary questions, just like you can't anticipate what other tests I'm going to propose. I will allow Helena to finish asking this question, and then we need to go back to the cross scrutiny. Mr. Chairman, it is a practice to facilitate the business operators, so it is voluntary, it is not mandatory. Of course, the majority of the shipping companies have been very cooperative. When they receive information about their goods, they're willing to provide us with the information in advance using the electronic system. Of course, some companies, as I have said, owing to their own operational difficulties or they are not able to give advance notice, but we are still able to contact them and have asked them to provide us as much information as possible to us so that we can carry out an assessment. Dr. Wong, I don't think he has been clear. 90% of the shipping companies will give advance notice. But what about the rest? Why are they not willing to submit the information? That's the first question. Second question, it is purely voluntary when it comes to the advance notification. What about transport by air and transport by land? Does it mean that everything is voluntary? How come that we are so relaxed? How come that we don't mandate the advance notification on all means of transport if we are really that concerned about food safety, so that we will be free from contaminated food? We won't be having the gutter oil being imported into Hong Kong. I think members need to be succinct. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Wong. Well, the importers must do this within 14 days of the importation of food, that is, submission of information to us. To facilitate the business operators and to enhance the efficiency of clearance, we have an electronic platform so that they may submit information in advance so as to facilitate an earlier assessment, and that can speed up the clarification. For the arrangement with the air industry, it is a cooperation and it is voluntary, but then they are willing to and happy to do so in advance, so we don't have any difficulties. For the for the transport by land, it is under the I&E regulation. So within 30 minutes of the arrival, they should have already given us the information. Dr. Wong, does it mean that importation by sea transport is the weakest link? Because you have said that there is a legislative requirement to cover transport by land, and then transport by air, it is voluntary and they are cooperative. For the rest, it means that 10% of those imported by sea will be vulnerable. So would you turn this into something mandatory? And I want to know about the quantity of food imported by such an approach. Well, I would suggest that we shouldn't do so, because if we pursue this line of questions, then we are departing from the theme of today's discussion. Well, it's food. I think we need to have a comprehensive view. Eggs and food are, of course, part and parcel. I'm justified to ask this question. Do you allow the officials to answer my question? Yes, I do. But if I allow this line of question to continue, they may not give you satisfactory replies. It's up to me to say where I'm happy with the replies.
Dr. Wong, I have to ensure the efficiency of this meeting, and I would suggest that we try to be more precise for the government to answer your question. But, well, Chairman, I think don't waste time. Let the administration answer the question. Well, Dr. Wong, I'm speaking. Could you please give me the floor? I hope that the government officials will respond to your questions direct, and I hope that the members will understand that when the administration give a response, it may not be to your satisfaction. But if we drill on this, we will be wasting our time. Chairman, you are the one who's wasting time. I don't think the officials are going round in circles. Mr. Tang has been giving good answers. Don't waste Mr. Tang's time. Please let him answer my question. Okay, I hope that, we would be answering this for the last time, and then we'll move on. Chairman, perhaps let me try to respond to Dr. Wong's question. Mr. Tang has been talking about the existing arrangement, and as you have said, this is a voluntary scheme. But the legislation that we're talking about is to impose, stricter control on the import of eggs. So there is a part which states that they have to obtain the written permission from the department before the eggs are imported, and also they have to provide information to the department concerned so that we'll be able to track where the eggs come from. So this is an improvement of the existing arrangement. Secondly, when they import the eggs, they also have to provide a health certificate. So for the poultry eggs, we are going for the proposed legislation, and we are hoping that we will be able to obtain information about the eggs, further in advance. Thank you, Chairman. I would like to ask whether any members have any questions. No, then Dr. Wong, second round of questions, please. Maybe I haven't heard the administration's response clearly. Will the CNED and CFS consider amending the legislation so as to ensure that a voluntary scheme for providing information would become a mandatory one, and whether you would change the 14 days advance notice to a lesser time? Because, if you don't lessen the time for the provision of advance information, then the food would have already found their way into the market. So I think this is a loophole that we need to plug. It may be causing a major problem to the community. So please don't assume that for the 10% who are not willing to provide information on imported goods in advance, it's not causing a problem. If the 90% are not causing problem, but the remaining 10% is causing a problem, then it is a problem. So I hope the administration will see whether they will try to introduce legislative amendments to plug this loophole. Undersecretary, thank you, Dr. Wong. For the purpose of the proposed legislation, we are trying to tackle the two questions, Dr. Wong, that you have mentioned. First, before the eggs are imported, our suggestion is that they have to provide information on the eggs to FEHD in advance, and the FEHD has to provide a written permission for the eggs to be imported. So we will be able to obtain information on the eggs before they are imported into Hong Kong. Secondly, it's a mandatory requirement. They have to obtain the permission before the eggs are imported. Chairman, so if it is the advance information that is important and the permission to be obtained that's important, then why don't we introduce these two requirements on all types of food, including oil, for example? What are the other countries doing? What's happening in the United States? Do they have to provide information in advance before the food are imported into San Francisco and Los Angeles? Customs, do you know about this? Can we do better in Hong Kong? Administration? Customs, please. Thank you, Chairman. For the United States, I don't have the information about the import control mechanism at hand, but for the Hong Kong customs, we are abiding by the existing import and export control requirements. Dr. Wong is concerned about the food imported by sea, and some shipping companies may not be providing the information to us in advance. We appreciate this concern. And for the customs department, we will try to educate the shipping companies and rely on our collaboration with them and encourage them to provide the information in advance through our electronic system. Of course, for food safety, we think that this is an important issue and of concern to everyone, and we have been collaborating very closely with the CFS. If the CFS has question about a certain shipment, then for the risk assessment, we will assist it and liaise with the shipping company to obtain the necessary information. If they do not provide the information in advance, we will also go to the shipping companies to gather the information from them, to get as much information as we can, and then transfer them to the CFS so that they can do their work. So in future, we will continue to collaborate closely with the CFS and try to work better. Of course, for legislative amendment, this concerns a policy issue. I think I will relay Dr. Wong's points to the relevant bureau after this. Well, thank you, Mr. Tang, Assistant Commissioner. You said that a small number of shipping companies. Do I need to raise my hand for another round question? Yes, please. Thank you, Chairman. I want to raise another round of questions. For the small number of shipping companies who are not willing to provide information in advance, what are the difficulties that they are facing? Are they operating big ships or small ships? I guess maybe small ships are involved. Are they talking about river vessels, or are they talking about big containers? And what kind of goods are they importing into Hong Kong? Why is it so difficult for them to provide the information in advance to you, Customs? The administration, I hope that you would try to answer the questions raised by Dr. Wong straight ahead. Thank you, Chairman. Dr. Wong is asking about the small number of shipping companies and on whether they are not playing by the rules. I would not say that they are the naughty ones because this is a voluntary system. It's not a mandatory system. I think for the shipping companies, they have different factors for consideration. Maybe they want to provide the information in advance, but maybe because of resources constraint, they can't do it. And also the information are from mainland. Maybe they don't have the information at hand for them to make an advance notification to us. So we will try to ask them to provide as much information as they can. So we hope that we can try to do as best as we can and make analysis based on the best information available. So I'm not saying that these shipping companies are the naughty boys, but because of reasons like maybe resource constraints or maybe communication with overseas companies, they may not be able to get the information in time for advance notification to us. So we will try to approach them individually and see how we can assist them to improve their process so that they can provide information to Customs or CFS in advance. Thank you. Dr. Wong? What about poultry eggs? How do they come to Hong Kong? Do they come to Hong Kong by sea, land, or air? Yes, we talked about that at the last meeting. Are they mostly from imported to Hong Kong by sea? Well, the information are available on table. The administration has table a paper. So there is the breakdown of the import of eggs by different modes of transport. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for reminding me that this is there is a paper. So 65.9% of the eggs are imported by sea. So how many of them are imported by the shipping companies who provide the information in advance? How many of them are imported by the shipping companies who provide information in advance? Thank you, Dr. Wong. According to the information, we know that about 65.9% of the eggs are imported by sea. So if we have the legislation enacted, then the question of whether they are voluntarily providing the information in advance is not really an issue, because before they import the eggs to Hong Kong, they have to provide us with the information and obtain our written permission before the eggs are imported. So if the legislation can come into effect, then we will have an enhancement to the current arrangement, and they also need to provide a health certificate. How many days in advance do they need to obtain all the necessary documentation? My colleague from CFS, please. Well, Chairman, they have to obtain all the provide us with all the necessary information. We don't have sort of a specified time frame, but they have to complete all the paperwork before they import the eggs. So they have to provide all the eggs and obtain your permission before the eggs are put onto the ships or the vessels, the cargo, the cars. So you are now talking about eggs first. So for food other than eggs, what's going to happen to them? What's the administration going to do about this? Do you have any proposed measures to tighten control over those minority shipping companies which do not provide information in advance? Which bureau will follow up on this? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Wong. All along, we put food safety first, and we adopt a risk-based assessment approach. So we are not just talking about the import, we also do work at the retail and wholesale level. We think the latter is also important. So we have a regular food surveillance program. Every year, 65,000 samples will be tested at the different levels, from import, wholesale, and retail. And we produce the results monthly, and we announce them monthly. And for seasonal festivals like, when Chinese New Year comes or when the Moon Festival comes, we will try to conduct sample tests on moon cakes. Well, I don't think the Undersecretary is answering my question, Mr. Chairman. Are you aware of that? Yes, I will remind her. Undersecretary, could you please answer Dr. Wong's question? So for food other than poultry eggs, I think everyone is concerned about this. I think after this meeting, we will relay Dr. Wong's concern to the relevant panel so that there will be a further discussion on that, because this is a meeting examining the bill. So please come back to the amendment regulations, and please express your views on the amendment regulations. Last question, please. Undersecretary. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Wong. As I have said before, for other food types, we have a surveillance program, and it is a well-proven program, and it is risk-based. Well, Chairman, I don't want to listen to this. Of course, everything is effective. It is effective before something bad happens, but we know loopholes exist. I have pointed out the loopholes, and I am asking you whether you are doing anything to plug the loopholes. What about food other than eggs? we identified this problem about the import of food by sea, and the shipping companies concerned have not providing the information in advance. What's going to happen to that? Dr. Wong, we are talking about legislation concerning eggs here, and it is not possible for us to talk about the import of food other than eggs. Let's relate the issue to the relevant panel. Chairman, I think the administration is not aware that there is a question. There is no point to go back to the panel. I have raised this question at the panel many times, and the administration has said that they have been conducting 65,000 samples every year. It won't help. Dr. Wong, if we drag on this issue here, I don't think you would get any answer to your questions here. I would suggest that let's relate the issue back to the panel, please. Chairman, I'm not talking about whether we should discuss the issue now, because we are scrutinizing this piece of legislation, and we have spotted that there is a loophole and there is a weak link here. So I'm asking the administration whether you will follow up on this and how you will follow up on this. Let me know who will follow up on this, and I will stop, and then we can move on. If the administration say that they are not going to do anything about this, then I think it is useless for us to sit here and have this meeting. Well, of course, we're meeting here to scrutinize the proposed legislation. What's the purpose of scrutinizing legislation, Chairman? Dr. Wong, if we drill on this, I don't think we'll be able to have this piece of legislation scrutinized by the end of next year. So my suggestion is let us relay the issue that you have pointed out to the panel. Otherwise, we'll be going out of ambit.
Can I ask the administration to name the policy bureau and the official responsible for this matter? Professor Chen, for the safeguards for food safety, we have been improving our mechanisms. Just like in the case of this amendment exercise concerning poultry eggs, it is a very good example. When we see a problem, we will try to see how we can resolve the problem, how we can make improvements. For Dr. Wong, she's concerned about the transport by sea, and he's concerned about the remaining 10%. Well, in fact, if necessary, we may ask questions. We can demand information. Yes, we do appreciate that there is room for improvement. However, for the transport by sea, we don't have a checkpoint to stop the goods and carry out sample testing. But it doesn't mean that there is no test at all. What we are doing now is that we have already talked to the CNE, and we try to see how we can set up an office. And of course, we have to take into account the flow of work of the importation of goods by sea. Thank you. Mr. Wu. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Wong asked many times as to how this will be followed up. The Undersecretary has said that at the container port, you are going to set up a control point for food imported by sea. Please tell us when this will be done. That's the first point. Second point, it seems that the Undersecretary was telling us that we haven't got an advanced notification system for goods transported by sea. Does it mean that they can freely come into Hong Kong and become part of a food chain? And then we have been told that for your food surveillance program, over 60,000 samples have been collected. Do you have a breakdown as to the means of transport? Now, let me say this. I'll give you extra time. For anything other than eggs, that should be taken up by the panel. Mr. Wu, you're asking questions for the first time, so I try to be less rigid. I'll give the floor to Undersecretary, and let's come back to the regulations after that. Yes, for the first question, it isn't really about eggs, but then there's That's under paragraph 8. If you don't allow us to ask questions, let's all go home then. Under Secretary, yes, thank you for your question. We appreciate and we understand what Dr. Wong was talking about. And in fact, the CFS is actively considering how we can sort of step up our surveillance and control over importation of food by sea. As I have said, we would like to set up a food inspection checkpoint at the container terminals for the purpose of testing food products imported by sea so as to enhance our safeguard for food safety. We are trying to sort of consider the procedures involved. Let me say this once again. It is not that we haven't got the information, but then it is voluntary and it is also electronic, as the CNE has said. And 90% of the shippers have already done so. For the rest, if necessary, we can always ask for information from them. I'm interested in paragraph 8. All that I am going after is the timing, because they're saying that they would like to set up a food inspection checkpoint at the container terminals. I just want to know when this will be done. And the Secretary, thank you, Mr. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Wu. Well, the CFS is working very hard to rationalize the workflow, even if we can set up a checkpoint. Well, as to how all the food items can be channeled to this checkpoint and how the procedures will be carried out, we need time to finalize the details. Maybe Dr. Lee can talk about the details. Dr. Lee, as the Undersecretary has said, currently we don't have a timetable. For us to have cooperation with the C&E department, there's a lot for us to sort out before we can achieve that. What about your timetable to sort out the matters? How long will it take? Dr. Lee, for the time being, we haven't got a timetable. No timetable for the time being. Mr. Wu, can you not then tell us, since you say that you don't have a timetable for the time being, when are you going to submit a paper to the panel? As I have said, we are sort of working on this set of regulations, and we'll try to sort out the matters, and in the coming year we'll go back to the panel for food safety and environmental hygiene. Mr. Wu, well, currently it is a voluntary notification system. Does it mean that for vessels in our harbor, if they would like to berth, it means that they can berth anywhere, and then the food can find a way into the food chain? Administration, C&E. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Wu. Currently, there are two ways to unload, either at the container terminal. For bulk cargo, they can go to the public cargo working areas. Well, they are all under our control. Does it mean that for the PWCAs, if they don't provide any information, then they can sort of just unload the goods and then the food will enter our food chain? Administration, C&E. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Wu. The C&E has adopted a risk-based approach to sample test the food items. The CFS has very close liaison with the food importers. If they would like to test any consignments of food, they can make arrangements with the food importers, and the CND will try our best to cooperate. Mr. Wu, thank you, Mr. Chairman. What about food imported by sea? I want to know about the risk assessment. Is it the same as that for importation by air and importation by land. Are you about eggs? Don't make life difficult for me. Yes, of course, I think for the importation of eggs, it has been dealt with. But I just want to have a supplementary question. I suggest that we confine our questions to the regulations. I'll allow you to finish with this round of questions, and I'll give you extra time for other things. I think that should be taken up by the panel. For paragraph 8, I think you better ask this question within the context of this set of regulations so that you won't make life difficult for me. CFS, risk assessment. Is it the same? You want to know whether the risk assessment is the same for all means of transport? Mr. Chairman, depending on the type of food as well as the place of origin. So our risk assessment is based on such factors other than the means of transport. But of course, the means of transport from time to time may have a bearing, because for certain types of food, they are more likely to be carried by particular means of transport. For eggs from the mainland, some of them come by land, so we have checked them at Mankamto. Others are by sea. For overseas eggs, most of them are by sea, a small number by air. So for our sample taking and sample testing, we attach more importance to the place of origin than the means of transport. Say eggs coming from the mainland, whether they have been delivered to Hong Kong by truck via Mankamto, and whether they have come by sea, and we don't see a distinction about the risk involved. Well, the means of transport will determine the location of the checkpoint. Poultry eggs. Now, the CFS has told us that the risk would be the same. Let us take the example of poultry eggs. I want to know whether you have the same rate of sample taking for all means of transport. Dr. Lee. Well, in fact, we have already got two sets of figures. In paragraph 2, we have got the figures from the Census and Statistics Department. Entry point by land, entry point by air, and entry point by water. You can find out about the ratio. Well, entry point by water in 2014, they took up 65.9%, but then we haven't got any samples being taken. I think that's what we can arrive at by taking the two tables at the same time. We've been told that the risk assessment is the same. Now, for the importation of poultry eggs, now you have said that the risk assessment is the same. So you haven't. Do I understand it correctly? Well, for the figures here, well, some of the information cannot be shown here. At the Kwai Chung container terminal, we haven't got a inspection checkpoint, and so we haven't got a breakdown by sea. Yes, we don't have the figures because currently we haven't got a checkpoint at Kwai Chung, but it doesn't mean that the CFS is not having samples of eggs imported by sea. It is just that the CFS hasn't got all the detailed statistics. Thank you. All right, let's come back to the regulations. Dr. Wong, fourth round, 3 minutes. Let me get it clear. We have got a road cargo system. This is not voluntary. Thank you, Dr. Wong. Yes, indeed, it is a statutory requirement. For this road cargo system, do you not have the ability to extend it to cover importation by sea? Administration. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Wong. Well, it is a statutory system. It applies to the surveillance of road cargo only. What about the possibility of the FHB liaising with the CNE? If you don't amend the road cargo system, can you not have something similar for transportation by sea? That is a sea cargo system. We have always been making improvements in relation to safeguards of food safety and also the surveillance program. Of course, it covers suggestions made by members. So when we look at our systems covering transport by sea, we will look at this possibility. Dr. Wong, can we not get a paper from the administration? That is how the system will be amended. Yes, I think it's a reasonable request. I hope the administration will give us a paper, that is, give a paper to the FSEH panel. What about this subcommittee? If we can complete the work today, then it will be disbanded, as long as they can give us the information. Dr. Wong, any other questions? If not, then we'll come back to the Import and Export General Amendment Regulation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me go to the third regulation, Food Business Amendment Regulation 2015. It is a technical amendment about the change of name so as to reflect the fact that in future the control will cover eggs as well. So it is technical. I'm happy to take questions from members. Dr. Wong. Questions? Any questions? Let me ask a question. For eggs, it means all sorts of eggs: cooked eggs, raw eggs, salted duck eggs, and century eggs. Mr. Chairman, for the Imported Game, Meat and Poultry Amendment Regulation 2015, we have already added a definition for egg. And in fact, we have already said that we cover eggs, whether shelled or unshelled, raw or partially cooked, salted, preserved, or otherwise processed, whether it is in frozen, liquid, or dried form, or whether it contains any functional ingredient. So it will be brought under control. What we want to achieve is that we hope that the provisions will be clearer for easier compliance by the industry.
Any further questions, members? Any comments? Chairman, we have really introduced the proposed amendments and answered members' questions concerning the three proposed pieces of legislation. I have nothing further to add. Thank you, Chairman. Any further questions, members? If not, then we have finished examination of the three pieces of legislation. Dr. Wong? I would like to ask whether our legal advisor have any points to raise, anything that we have to pay attention to. Legal advisor, please. Thank you, Chairman. Concerning the drafting of the legislation, I don't have any questions about the terms and the terminologies, but members may wish to note that for the report on the supplementary legislation, you members can refer to paragraph 5 of the paper. When we were talking about the subsidiary legislation, we have submitted a report to the House Committee. And the legal report on the three pieces of legislation are stated in paragraph 5 of that paper. And it is clearly stated in that paper that the administration is proposing to amend the IGMPR. For this piece of legislation, the proposal is to add eggs to this piece of legislation. So that means the existing provisions concerning game, meat, and poultry have been covered by another piece of legislation, and there is a control mechanism over game, meat, and poultry there. So the import licensing system is covered by another piece of legislation. We have also asked the administration that at the moment, the arrangements concerning eggs is a bit different from meat, poultry, and game. So now there is no statutory provision regarding the requirement for importers to obtain permission before the eggs are imported. So it is stated in Clause 2A that the importers have to provide information to the administration before the eggs are imported. And the same requirements are imposed on eggs as compared to game, poultry, and meat. So at present, there is no need to apply for permission to import eggs, but they have to provide information. So the information that they need to provide is the same, whether they're importing eggs or game, poultry, and meat. So the mechanism for examining these different types of food are the same, but they are governed by different pieces of legislation. So in my report to the House Committee, I have pointed out in paragraph 5 of my paper that the only difference, the major difference, is that there is a discrepancy between the penalties. Because, right now the levels of penalties are different. Although the import control mechanism is the same. Maybe I can briefly talk about that here. For poultry, if they import something without permission, so the penalty is right now involves a fine of $50,000 and imprisonment for $500,000 and imprisonment for 2 years. But for eggs, they will be governed by the Cap 132AK. So the level of fine would only be $50,000 and an imprisonment for 6 months. So the administration is mindful of this different level of penalty under Cap 132AK and Cap 60. And the administration has pointed out that it would separately conduct a comprehensive review. So I would like to bring this point to members' attention. Administration, would you like to respond to the point about the different levels of penalty? Because there is a 10 times difference between the two levels of penalty. Yes, Mr. Chairman, we are aware of that. The penalties under the IGMPR and the IEO is different. So we would conduct a review separately and conduct a comprehensive review of all the food-related ordinances and the subsidiary legislation, as well as the food safety ordinance. Because we are talking about two different pieces of legislation here, and there are two levels of penalty, but we will try to conduct a comprehensive review of all the food safety-related penalties. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Wong? Any further questions? So are we talking about a fine for $50,000 or $500,000? Well, we are now talking about a fine of $50,000 and imprisonment for 6 months. So for $500,000 and imprisonment for 2 years, we are talking about meat, poultry, and game. So they also have a higher risk of being contaminated. Legal advisor, do you think that this is okay? Is there any contradiction? When you go to court, would there be any disputes? Well, at the moment, the administration is aware that there are two different levels of penalty, and it is indicated that eggs are going to be governed under Cap 132AK. So according to this piece of legislation, the penalty is $50,000 and imprisonment for 6 months. But for meat, game, and poultry, they are governed by another piece of legislation, and there is another level of penalty stated in that piece of legislation. So since we are talking about two different pieces of legislation, and there are two sets of penalties, so members may be concerned that the two have to be tallied, and I think that can be taken forward in future by the relevant panel, because the administration, in response to our earlier inquiries, have pointed out that if we want to raise the penalty in respect of import of eggs to that of meat and poultry, it may involve amendment to the Food Safety Ordinance, and that will take time. So according to the administration's response, if they want to impose control on eggs quickly, they want to go ahead as proposed now. So for eggs, they will be governed by CAP 132AK, that is the piece of legislation that we're looking at now. And in future, the concern raised by members could be taken forward separately. So, Secretary, could you please put that down in the minutes so that the administration can follow up? Last question, Under Secretary. Well, thank you, Chairman. We are aware that we are talking about two pieces of legislation, and there are two sets of penalties under the different pieces of legislation. So we notice that there is a difference between the level of penalty. But since we would like to have a comprehensive review later, so we would tackle the issue then. Thank you, Chairman. Fifth round of questions. Chairman, I'm not going to raise a question. Yes, I would like to raise a question. Is this our second meeting only? So we will finish scrutiny of the legislation today? Yes, if there are no further questions raised. So I would like to question, when we had the meeting on the 30th of June, do you remember whether I was present then? Yes, you were. How come that it was stated that I was absent for that meeting? Can we talk about that later, Dr. Wong? So you're not even aware that I was present for a meeting, Chairman. So you said only two meetings have been held, and I was present at the last meeting. But it was stated that I was absent. What's happening to our minutes? No, that's not the minutes of meeting. Well, this is information material for members, and it's stated under the attendance that I was absent. I'm talking about question CB2 1792. Well, I think it is only saying that some members indicated that they would like to attend. So this is an indication of members' attendance. Well, I was present for a 2-hour meeting, and I raised numerous questions, but then it was put down in the paper that I was absent. Well, this is not a minutes of meeting. Well, Chairman, I don't know what this is, but this is a piece of Legislative Council paper. So, Chairman, you have to be careful. This is a very small committee. Okay, I'm aware of your concern. I'm not aware whether Mr. Fong was present, but let's go back to the video recording, and you will see which members are present and which members were absent. Let's take this as the last question. Any further points that the administration would like to raise? No. Thank you, Chairman. Well, please be aware that the legal advisor has just pointed out there are different levels of penalty under CAP 132 and CAP 60. And I know that you will take follow-up action. But I hope that you would really carefully look into these two pieces of legislation to see whether amendments to them would be required. I think it is very clear that we will cover eggs in CAP 132AK, but the members of the public or the courts may not be aware of what we've been discussing today. So please look at it and then come back to the panel. Lastly, any further questions, members? Chairman, when will this piece of legislation be submitted to the full council? I'm going to cover that right now. I want to remind members that scrutiny of the bill is November, 14th of October. And we would report back to the House Committee on the 9th of October. So this is the schedule. So after going back to the panel, we will go to the full council. Will you be putting this in writing to the members? Yes, it's already in writing. Yes, of course, we will remind members of these dates. So if there are no further questions, we have finished scrutiny of the proposed legislation. Any other business? No any other business to be raised.